Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Spiritual Healing Podcast, the official healing activity of Inayat Order. We have such a special event for you all today. First of all, you're probably wondering, is he talking? Is there music going? Well, it's both. So you're actually hearing a music that is written and produced by our today's guests, which you'll hear all about them in a minute. And so we will have a bit longer podcast today, Zoomcast, because we feel like there's so much to discuss and it's such an important topic with so much new evidence and just overall fascinating. And so Nuralima and I welcome you to this journey of today. And with that, let's introduce our guest today. Nuralima, you go first.
I would like to introduce Yuval Ron, who is an award-winning composer who has been involved in the world of music therapy since a commission in 1990 from the researcher Robert Monroe of the Monroe Institute for hemisync music composition using binaural beats. He has collaborated with neuroscientists Mark Waldman and Dr. Andrew Newberg, psychotherapist Dr. Sanjay Manchanda, pioneer healers Dr. Richard Gold, who also joins us, and Gail Lynn. He's worked with Sufis, Kabbalists, Ayurvedic healers, and is the founding director of the record label Meta Mindfulness Music, which produces quality, intentional healing music for use in clinics and treatment centers worldwide. Yuval was invited to perform meditative music for the Dalai Lama, the Sufi Sheikh Sidi Muhammad, collaborated with the Sufi leaders Pir Zia Inayat Khan and Pir Shabda Khan, with numerous master musicians, including Omar Farouk Tikbelik, Estrella Morente, and Diva Pramal, and with the Zen Buddhist priest and master artist Hirokazu Kosaka.
Of course, there's a reason why Nuralima introducing Yuval Ron, because there's no way I can spell any of those.
I'm sure I mispronounced, but
and of course,
all with good intentions.
And of course, we forgot to introduce ourselves. This is only a third podcast, so we're.
Well, you said it with us.
So this is Nuralima Smith, who's
I'm a Shafayat and the co-vice president of the Inayat Healing Order, and this is
Rakib Misha Kogan. Same titles. So with that, let's introduce Dr. Gold. So Dr. Richard Gold, or Rick, how he likes to go, is a licensed acupuncturist and holds a doctorate in psychology. He graduated from Auburn College in 1972 with a degree in world religions and a minor in pre-medicine. He graduated from the New England School of Acupuncture in 1978, and since then has devoted his professional career to the study, practice, researching, teaching, and publishing in the field of East Asian medicine. Dr. Gold has pursued advanced studies in China in 1981, Japan in 1986, and Thailand in 88 and 89 and 92. Dr. Gold was one of the 4 founders of the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine, a regionally and nationally accredited college of traditional Chinese medicine with campuses in San Diego, Chicago, and New York City. He served on the board of the college for many years and continues to teach there. Dr. Gold was first introduced to meditation and yoga in 1970. That's actually before I was born, so that tells you something. And during a month-long meditation retreat, and has pursued mental mindfulness and meditative awareness over the past 40 plus years. So with that, Rick and Yuval, thank you so much for joining. We're so excited to have you. Of course, we have to introduce the music too. So I'm going to make it just a little bit smidge louder. And this is, I've been personally listening a lot to your music lately. This is a 40 Hertz music, which we'll talk all about. And right now we're playing track Water on Spotify. So I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds and we'll dive in and I'll close this. All right. So I'm going to turn off the music for time being. And again, welcome so much. We're so excited that you're here.
Coming.
Yeah, and let's just dive right in. I think just for starters, maybe one of you can talk a little bit about how you guys got together and, you know, just a little bit of introduction about your work. You've been
Certainly
together for a long time, right? You guys been
13 years now we've been producing together. And I must say, I never once dreamed of being a music producer or working in the field of music until I met Yuval. I've always loved music, but it never even occurred to me. But it was a spiritual connection that happened. We were both teaching at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, different courses. I was teaching traditional Thai medical massaging. Yuval was teaching a class in neuroscience and sound. We really only met briefly. We never had a meal there or sat in the hot tubs together. But we just met the last day at the last moment and said hi. Yuval's Israeli by birth, and my wife is an Israeli also. And so she heard Yuval talking to his kids in Hebrew and introduced, and we caught a couple of his albums when we still were using CDs at the bookstore there. We said goodbye. It was very nice to meet you. Never thought anything more would come of it. Interestingly enough, on the way home for the first time of the 15 years I taught at Esalen, we stopped in Morro Bay to spend the night, which is a very interesting place where there's a huge volcanic plug in the harbor that no one knows how it got there. And I was with our kids were all small at that time, Yuval's and mine, and my kids got hungry. So we had a dinner reservation that we pushed up a whole hour. And we're sitting in the restaurant, just sat down, and my daughter looks out the window and she says, "Abba, you won't believe who's walking in." And here comes Yuval and his beautiful wife, Carolyn, and his wonderful children. We sat, got up, invited him to sit with us. And from that moment on, our hearts and minds were connected. And at that point, I had been using binaural beats to facilitate and hopefully deepening my meditation process. And we started to talk about that. And Yuval was very familiar with it. And without ever making a business plan or anything, we just decided we were going to do something together. And we wanted to use ancient wisdom traditions as a point of embarking. So with my background in Chinese medicine and interest in yoga and Ayurvedic. And we wanted to use modern neuroscience because we're both very academic and science-oriented, part of our brains also. Originally, we thought we were going to do a one-off of the 6 healing sounds of Chinese medicine. We loved working together. The music was well received. And one by one, we've just continued to work and continued to work. And as we'll discuss further together now, when we became aware of the potential of 40 Hertz, we shifted gears at that point, because previously we were using our music and brain entrainment to facilitate deepening meditation, taking people from beta, alpha, delta, and theta, going down into deep states. And this was very well received. But then when we learned about 40 Hertz and the potential and the huge tidal wave of cognitive problems that we're facing as a society, we've made this switch. And with Yuval's brilliance, we've done some innovations in that field that we're so thrilled to share with your audience today. That's the short story.
awesome. Thank you.
You've been collaborating with the Inayat music activity for a long time. How do you see your current work aligning with Mershid's teachings? And how have Mershid's teachings influenced your understanding of sound and music healing over the years?
Thank you for this question, Nuralima. Hazrat Inayat Khan is, it's hard for me to even describe my feeling and my relationship to his teaching, because for me, he is like an older brother or an older uncle that I met through his book, the sound, the mysticism of sound and music. And when I encountered this book as part of my research into the psychology of music, because I went to college in Boston, to Berklee College of Music, and I majored in film scoring. And part of my studies to become a film composer, I had to take classes in a science field called psychoacoustics. And psychoacoustics is the psychology of sound. How does sound affect our mind and our emotions and our psychology, and why certain sounds affect all of us in a universal way? Because you see, film music works in a universal way. You have to affect the audience in Japan and in Africa and in Israel and in America in the same way in a certain movie. The director counts on the music to make people feel pity for the character, or to feel hopeful for the character, or to feel that it's a tragic moment for the character. And so it has to be universal language of music that bring the audience to feel the emotions that the director wants them to feel at a particular time. And that is the science of psychoacoustics, which I studied back in college. And as part of my own research outside of the school, I wanted to learn more about it. And I looked for books about the psychology of sound. And I found the book of Hazrat Inayat Khan. And when I read that book, which is a cult classic, it influenced many people like Carlos Santana and even Charlie Parker and Coltrane, and so this was a cult classics among jazz musicians and some classical music and rock musicians, and I found it, and I felt at home suddenly. I felt that this is my language. This is how I feel. This is how I felt about music, that music is not just music, that music is a deep spiritual way to connect to the cosmos, to creation. And that's part of the teachings that I found in this book. And so this really oriented me and encouraged me to continue to explore music as a spiritual path, not just as music. And that kind of separated me from the other students and the other colleagues of mine that saw music just as music. And Hazrat Inayat Khan was very instrumental in putting me on this path. And then I forgot about it. I just thought that Hazrat Inayat Khan was a great mystic from India that came to the West and wrote this book and died, and that's it. I had no idea that there's a Sufi order in America. I had no idea that Pir Vilayat existed, and then Pirzia came along after to continue this lineage. And suddenly in 2004, maybe 10 years after I found the book of Hazrat Inayat Khan, 10 years later, I get an email from somebody named Suwardi, who is the Secretary General of the International Sufi Order. And he's writing to me, inviting me to come to teach in a conference at Pirzia Inayat Khan Sufi Order, International Sufi Order, International Conference at the Abode. And I thought, this is completely a hacker. I couldn't believe it. I never heard about the International Sufi Order. I never heard, I never heard about the Secretary General of the International Sufi Order. It sounds so fantastic and magical. And I picked up the phone because I wanted to make sure that it's not a hacker, and I called the number, and the Secretary General of the Sufi International Order answered the phone, and I saw that it's real. And he told me that Pirzia Inayat Khan is the grandson of Hazrat Inayat Khan and continuing the teaching and the lineage. And I was so delighted because it became real. The book and Hazrat Inayat Khan became real in my life. And so since 2004, I've been teaching with Pirzia and at the Abode. I've been there many, many times and taught at the Sufi International Order. And then it became, in recent years, the name changed to Inayat, based on Inayat Khan. And so that has been my story. And I wrote a book called Divine Attunement in 2014, yes, which in my mind is somewhat continuing some of the writing of Hazrat Inayat Khan. And I quote Hazrat Inayat Khan many times in my book, and I hope that, along with all the teachings of Pirzia and the other people in the order, my little book is also contributing to bring the message and the teaching of Hazrat Inayat Khan to contemporary audiences.
What a story. I think I'm trying to remember when you and I met first. I think it actually may have been at the 2004 camp.
Yes, yes.
I didn't realize that was the first time you've ever came to the contact.
Yes. Pir Shabda was teaching there, and I was teaching there, and out of that came the 7 pillars. I forgot to mention something really a magical little detail here in this story. So when I spoke with Suwardi, the Secretary General, I told him, "How did you find out about me in 2004?" And he said to me, this is another really incredible thing. He said, "Pirzia gave me your name." And I said, how did Pirzia know me? And he said, well, Pirzia was on a travel tour teaching in Europe, and he came back and a car picked him up at the airport. And on the radio, there was a national public radio program called Echoes, I believe. And it was late at night at 11 p.m. And Pirzia is being driven back to the Abode from the airport. And on the radio, they played my music. And Pirzia said, who is this? Or he took note. And he gave the name to the Secretary General and said, call this guy and bring him to the. So it was all, really magically arranged, not in a very obvious way, the way we connected. It's been incredible.
I think we all can say that there were magical moments like this.
Yeah.
With Pirzia dragging our feet left and right and wherever.
Yeah.
And so,
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's such. Okay, well let's go back to the music and sound. So when we were planning this, with the sort of Norlim and I thought about a variety of different angles we could approach this, but I think the 40 Hertz has kind of been taking over all of our attention lately, and I think we're just going to particularly center on that. Although by all means, if both of you want to bring up some other smaller topics, please do. But I think let's stay more around 40 Hertz. I think we really have to start with just defining what this is, why it's so important. Many of our listeners may not even ever heard of this, surprisingly, because even though now it's a pretty much standard understanding of how some of the neurodegenerative processes occur, and I'll explain some of this in a bit. But maybe I'll hand it to you guys and tell us a little bit about just kind of the theory of it, how you create the sound, because I actually would love to hear it for myself. I actually don't know how do you make that physically, believe it or not, and sort of, and also maybe talk a little bit about binaural and sort of the meaning of that too.
Would you like to go first, and I'll talk about how I create the sound?
Sure. Gamma waves are sort of were neglected in neuroscience and certainly in the meditative arena. Even for us too. I mean, I would see it on charts, but it never really rang a bell for me. But along the theme of what we're talking about, where magic is afoot in the land when people need to meet and learn about things, I was invited to a random lunch by the president of a small graduate school that I'm on the board of in San Diego called the California Institute for Human Sciences. And I met a man named Dr. Jeffrey Martin and Sanjay Manchada, and we were talking about healing sound. And And Sanjay, who's a clinician, turned to me. He said, "Have you looked into 40 hertz, or are you aware of 40 hertz?" And this light bulb went off of basically no.
What year was this?
This is just 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, before BC, before COVID, but still, and I brought that, and I started to research, and then I brought the information right away to Yuval, and a light bulb went off in his head, and we realized that there is a potential here, because this is the fastest frequency our brains that we're measuring in our brains. We're not. Some people are looking at the microtubules in the neurons for more evidence of something else happening in the brain, but that's a whole nother subject related to consciousness and how the neurons work. But when the brain is producing 40 hertz, in the gamma range, and particularly 40 hertz, it's so specific, it's so interesting. Something happens in the brain where cognition is improved, and focus improves, and moods improve. And it was sort of wording backward from that now, when people's brains, or people, when we're studying with dementia and Alzheimer's, there's an absence of 40 hertz activity in the brain. And so this is an area that's wide open for research that has to be done, because it's empirically evident now that when it's lacking, we have decline of cognition, we have mood disorders, we have physical pain. And so then with what we know about brain entrainment, if we can then work our way back to really helping the brain cycle at 40 hertz, we can see potential dramatic improvement. And this is coming, we're seeing that in animal studies. I don't know of many launched studies.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that, because that's how I got dragged into this. So I got dragged into this actually before we guys formed this very close working relationship now, which we'll talk a little bit about. But I got dragged into this by one of my partners, Andre, who's developed this app, ALZ Life, and it's a 40 hertz sound and 40 hertz light therapy. And so a few years ago, well, more like 6 years ago, I first stumbled upon the animal study showing complete cure of 100% cure Alzheimer's. So every mice was cured. And turned out that basically the most important pathology in the sort of the way brain waves work is the 40 hertz. So as you mentioned, Rick, every single Alzheimer's patient is completely lacking the 40 hertz. If you look the EEG wave, which we're actually doing as part of our clinical research, you can see that completely lacking. And the interesting aspect is it appears that may be one of the most important physiologic states, because the people who have it much less lacking seem to progress a lot slower. So while everybody has been over the years centering on, plaques and tangles and all kinds of other things, turns out that that's just a pathology. But the physiologic process, in addition to whole kinds of other drivers for Alzheimer's, which is not a topic of today, but if anybody is following my work, you guys see my main interest. But turns out that the 40 hertz is critical, and there has not been any attempts in the past by industry of any kind to try to stimulate that. So now you guys came to this kind of in parallel. I was coming to this more from the light therapy angle, and then, the sound came on the side of it. But most fascinating is that now we have a rapidly accumulating research. We just published the study, which I can't talk about it because the paper should come out in the next couple of weeks. So I have to just tell you that the results are dramatic. And we expect more studies. So our pilot was not randomized. It was just light and sound combined using an iPad. So free technology, in essence, if you already have an iPad. And the results are very good. And the other results using other techniques or other appliances that are actually some of them already FDA approved, showing pretty dramatic results. And so basically we can entrain our own lacking 40 hertz brain waves by listening and looking at the flickering light. Now, looking at flickering light is not necessarily pleasant, it requires time, and it's not a music. So today we're just going to talk about music. But let's come back to the sort of the question is, how do you actually make this stuff? Like, what is it? What's the practicality here?
Yes, I can address that, and it's interesting that as we worked with Dr. Manchada, and he gave me the information and the research, and he asked me to create brain entrainment 40 hertz, I started thinking about different layers of 40 hertz, because the idea is that we want to give the listener, the brain of the listener, a stimuli in the vibration of 40 hertz, which is like a low E. And the low E, it's called E1. It's one of the lowest note on the piano. It's the note E or Mi in European terminology. And interestingly enough, the European tuning of the piano is not exactly 40 hertz. So when you play that note E, E1, which is almost the lowest E on the keyboard, it's actually 41 hertz 0.25, something like that. So the Western tuning of music, which is called A = 440, which is 440 hertz, 440 cycles a second. That's most European orchestras and almost all the music that you hear in pop and rock and jazz. Everything is tuned to a tuner, and that tuner is not going to produce the 40 hertz. So in order to tune our instruments to 40 hertz, we have to lower their tuning to be a little lower, about a quarter tone, which is a quarter tone is in between the white key and the black key on the piano. So if you have two adjacent keys in the piano, the white and the black, in between, that's a quarter tone. And that is the difference that we have to tune our instruments a little lower. And interestingly enough, in the desert, when I spent time with the Bedouins and I studied their music and recorded with them and played with them, their tuning is about quarter tone lower than the way we tune our music. And if you think about the Bedouins, they are nomad people that live in the land. They've been doing it for thousands of years without changing the way they do things. And they tune their instruments about a quarter tone, which is a more relaxed sound. The strings are less tight. And interestingly enough, this Western tuning, I'm kind of going into a very interesting subject here before fully answering your question, but I think it's fascinating because this can open a whole cultural, historical point of view of what happened to our Western-oriented, technology-oriented culture. So the tuning that we are used to have been established in Europe over the last 300 years. So that's the world that we live in, how tight the strings of the orchestra are, how intense the woodwind players project their breath through the instruments. And that is the tuning that we currently have. But even in Europe, in Renaissance time and in Baroque time, they tuned the instruments a little lower. So when you listen, if you go in Boston to early music concert, or you go in New York to early music concert, they're tuning the instruments the way they did in Europe 300 years ago. And that is a more relaxed and darker and warmer tuning. And it would relate more to the note E1 at 40 hertz. So when the musicians will go through that note, it will be closer to 40 hertz. Now, nowadays, in Europe, in Germany, for example, and in Los Angeles, in New York, orchestras start to tune themselves even higher. And this is the new trend, even to go higher and tighter and brighter and tense sound. And so we're going away from that possibility even of experiencing the vibration of 40 hertz in music in general. So that's just one observation that I have. So back to how we create the 40 hertz sound. So we have, first of all, we have to tune our instruments about a quarter inch lower, which give us a warmer, more relaxed sound, vibration. Then we create a layer of binaural beats, which binaural beats are an illusion that is been created in the brain by feeding the brain two different frequencies, one in the right ear and a different frequency in the left ear. And the difference between the vibrations is a new third wave that is created in the brain. And we can control what vibration will be created in the brain by deciding what pulsation or what kind of frequency we give to the right ear versus the left ear. So for example, if we give 10 hertz, which is 10 cycles a second in the right ear, and we give 50 hertz in the left ear, the difference between 10 hertz and 50 hertz is exactly 40 hertz. And that would be the vibration that is created only in the brain of the listener if they're listening through headphones. It doesn't happen if you don't listen through headphones. And it doesn't happen in the brain of other people. It happens only in the brain of the person who listened to the headphones with those two vibrations. So this is a very simplified answer. There's a lot more art in it. You know, how do you harmonize the pulsation and the vibrations in the headphones with the vibrations of the music? It's not just random numbers. You know, every number and every vibration counts. So I choose vibrations that would be harmonious with the vibrations of the music. But that is one layer. So one layer of 40 hertz is through binaural beats in the brain of the listener. A second layer is actual 40 hertz vibration, which sounds like, in music, it sounds like a low note. It sounds something like, but that very low drone is exactly at E1 that is tuned down to 40 hertz. And that is a bass sound that you hear in the music and underneath the music, because the first layer that I talked about, the binaural beats pulsation, you cannot hear it. It's subliminal. It's there, but it's mixed very low, and your brain sees it, but you hardly notice it. It's like a low rumble, two different kinds of rumbles that are mixed very, very low. That's layer number one that I would call subliminal binaural beats layer. Then the second layer, the is noticeable. You can hear it, you can feel it, and it's a pleasant bass note that goes throughout the whole piece of music. That's second layer. The third layer is the music that the instruments that are tuned to 40 hertz are playing. And I particularly compose in the key of E1, 40 hertz, and I choose healing ragas as musical modes that are centering and coming back to E1, 40 hertz. So there's, in the music that the musicians play, there are many notes that are that actual 40 hertz. Not every note that they play is 40 hertz, otherwise the music will be one note music. But they keep the central note, what we call the one, or the tonic from Greek, that tonic, that one, that home note, that is the father of the scale, the musical scale, is 40 hertz. So the musicians using it a lot because I write the composition to utilize that note a lot. And that's how we get what I call a triple strength 40 hertz music.
So it's pretty clear that the 40 hertz is probably one of the most fascinating new discovery for cure of Alzheimer's. It's not we're not going to talk about supportive, we're going to talk about cure for Alzheimer's, because that you reverse the mechanistic problem. But, you know, just before the podcast, Rick brought up this idea that, you know, there's clearly other benefits to people who don't have any cognitive impairment. Like, I've started listening to the music some months ago, and, you know, through the headset, actually fancy headset thing to Rafa, my wife, who left others from her. So, and, you know, and I started noticing immediate effect. Like, you basically, it's a lot, it's a lot easier for me to concentrate, and speed of processing improved dramatically. And so I've tried to listen to it now almost daily, even sometimes as part of my meditative practice. So let's talk a little bit, just for a couple of minutes, about, there's not a lot of evidence, I think, for this area, because I haven't seen, none of us, I think, have seen the research on this, but you guys collected all kinds of stories over the years. What did people tell you, like, when they use this technology?
Well, one thing is seems to be some benefit with some people with fibromyalgia, which is one of these sort of, excuse the expression, garbage pails where anybody with systemic physical pain sort of get shuffled into. And I think it's because, just theoretically thinking, as we're cleaning the tau, potentially cleaning the tau proteins and the amyloid plaques from the brain, the receptors are going to become revitalized, and so this kind of systemic recurring unyielding pain can be diminished, and that could be really, really dramatic. What I'd like to know from you, Misha, is did they in some of the animal studies, do they then do autopsies on the brains,
Right,
to see if there's
plaques and tangles are gone, and very quickly, within 1 to 2 weeks in mice. So it's
that is
effect. Yeah,
extraordinary, and we're sitting today in our discussion on the precipice of the FDA approving.
It's so funny. I was just thinking that today, it's just randomly happened that today FDA approved drug that doesn't do anything. It slows down disease by a minute amount and causes 8% bleeding in the brain and 1% death. And the FDA just approved that. And here's the technology that's now been on the market for, and it's potentially free. I think that's the point.
That's an important point, because if this drug, with the statistics of dementia and Alzheimer going like this, and the cost, this use of this drug could bankrupt the Medicare and the system. It's unfathomable.
So Rick, you and I are passionate about this. We need to slow ourselves down.
Yeah,
I can talk about this nonsense.
Because the other thing I think is just so interesting is, why isn't there emphasis on diet? Because we know that the amyloids can be diminished with essential oils in the increasing diet. If we can,
a lot of things can influence this. So
yes.
I think, those of you who've been following my work know that we have a whole program that uses all kinds of methods and treatments. And
because we have as a society to find, and like you were saying, the potential for music and the efficacy potential, and there's no, even research has been done that there's no negative side effects. I think Johns Hopkins came out with this.
Right. That's a good point, actually. That's a good point, that the 40 hertz appears to be extremely safe, whether it's a light or sound. And I think part of it is probably because it is something that our physiology normally produces. So we constantly produce those tunes, so to speak, the internal. It's actually, if I can, at some point when I meet Persia, I'll ask him or somebody, because, you kind of wonder, there's this whole concept in Sufism, Saud Sarmad, it's a universal sound of music, right? So that in certain meditative states, we can easily hear that sound. And I wonder if that's actually the 40, the actual anatomy of that is our internal 40 hertz sound that's produced, because it is much lower. Like when I hear it in my meditative practices, it's a very low level humming. It feels like not even a humming, it feels like a low level vibration, kind of that resonates in my ears. So I don't know if anybody ever researched this, but in our lineage, in our Inayat order, we talk about this and we practice this all the time.
Yeah, this is very interesting, Dr. Kogan. I want to point out to everybody that something that I found is there's a connection with the human voice and the range of the human voice, and maybe that can shed light about why 40 hertz is working for us. Is if you look at these are the ranges of soprano, alto, bass, and baritone. These are the human, in a human choir, you have different people singing different notes, and the lowest note is the bass singers. This is the range of the bass singers. And guess what? The lowest possible note for a normal professional choir singer, the lowest note is E1, which is 40 hertz. This is like the foundation of human vocalizing. Of course, you can have some extraordinary, unusual Tibetan monks who can even drag it a little lower to the note D, but most normal professional male singers, the bass note happened to be that note E1, which is the 40 hertz. That's just one observation that I find through my work that can be interesting. Another thing that we heard from Dr. Manchada, who got us started with 40 hertz, is that he uses it in his practice, he said, to help people who have brain trauma, heal from brain trauma. And he told me that he found that the 40 hertz increase blood flow in the brain, and he believes that the increase of blood flow improve healing.
Right, and the EMG changes are instant. So when we have, we just did in our study, what we did is we looked at patients with Alzheimer's, and then we give them light and sound. But we also look at the normal individuals, and we gave them in training just to do the EMG. And interestingly, you just do 40 hertz light, that doesn't happen. You do sound, it happens not as much, but it happens quite significantly. But then you combine the light and sound, and there's a massive peak that's almost instant. And so, and that, I mean, it's a guess at this point, but, that is probably the future. So the future is, some kind of a continuous support of anybody with any kind of cognitive concerns, attention deficit disorder, any head trauma, any disease that in essence drags down the 40 hertz. And I think it's the actual research has mostly been looked at Alzheimer's. I have not done my homework, and I haven't looked at, let's say, in Parkinson's, has there been studies done to look at patients lose the 40 hertz? So that's definitely something we will be doing in the upcoming.
I wonder potential to look into autism too, if that's a part of one of the factors.
Absolutely. And actually, Andre is very interested in autism, so he's kind of, he and I are talking about, can we?
These are all very interesting.
Amos is keeping track of time here.
Very concerns, and I am the timekeeper, so I just would like to swing this back around, if we could, to the Healing Activities retreat, which is going to be October 19th to the 22nd. And we're very excited that you both will be joining us on Saturday, the 21st, doing a 3-hour workshop during the retreat. You'll go a lot deeper into this topic, but could you give us just a little preview of the healers, of what the healers who are going to attend can expect, and how to integrate your music into their day-to-day work and their healing for others?
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to this, because it's been several years since I've been at a retreat, because of COVID and all the interruptions, also with moving the order moved out of the abode and relocated in Virginia, and this whole restructuring really didn't make it possible for us all to meet in person or even through Zoom in this way. So I'm going to be on remote call, because I'm based in Los Angeles, and I believe most people are going to be on remote for that. But I will offer live music, oud music, meditative contemplative music that I'm going to play live, and I will demonstrate the impact of sound on thoughts, images, sense of temperature, the whole psychological and psychoacoustic aspect of music. And then from there, I will segue into suggestions of music that could help people in their practices, in their life. We'll touch on 40 hertz, of course, and I will give some links to music that people can meditate to and use it in their own life. And then we'll have questions and answers, and that will be that 3-hour session.
You said the music, the first thing you said was wood. Did I hear that right?
Oud, O-U-D.
The transcription said wood. And the funny thing is, because you actually have a track that's called wood. You have track for each element, which I've personally been enjoying tremendously. So
Yes.
maybe it's a good place for us to do little samples of the music, and then let's talk a little bit about your new album that just came out a couple of weeks ago, right? So I'm gonna put a
Just 1 second.
Sure.
Rick, did you want to say anything?
Well,
you look like you wanted to add something.
just to the extent that I play this music for my patients in my clinical practice of Chinese medicine and acupuncture. The feedback is so positive because the music is both simple and complex. It really facilitates a deeper relaxation, and this is moving. You know, so often if you play tracks from streaming music from Spotify or Pandora in the new age or ambient, it's redundant, it's lazy. So, to me, a lot of it sounds like funeral music in a sense. It just doesn't lighten my spirit. It drags it down, and there's an inherent joy in this music that Yuval's producing, creating, and composing. And so, just empirically speaking, and just as a practitioner in the clinic for all day, the music really facilitates a sense of joy and like an inner calmness, but a focus too. It's a nice alchemy of sound and experience. And so,
do you just play it over the air, or you have people?
Yeah, we don't use the binaural part. We have an integrated sound system.
Right, perfect. Obviously I'm thinking we should start this at our clinic. We haven't done.
Yeah, and because as an acupuncturist, and this is something we really haven't talked. We talk about sound and light, but I think there's a potential for the touch part of it, to bring each cell of the body more into the process. Is going to maybe have more potential. Or even there are people that have like a water cushion bed where they play 40 hertz music through it, and the sound transmits through the water into the body. And the potential, because our brains are so much water, I think there's great potential for that being part of the process.
Yeah. Well, the music we hear transmits through the whole body. It's not just our hearing.
Right.
Body.
Right.
Norlima, you're trying to say something.
If you're going to try to get a snippet in, I think we need to move because we are running out of time. And I just want to point out that the information on how to find this wonderful music these folks are presenting and the other wonderful research they have, you're going to post that on the YouTube channel, right?
Right. It's going to be in description for the video. So
we use this as part of our newsletter to maintain contact with our members, and we will be posting it on the discourse lists and in the newsletter. So if anybody is looking for that information, it'll be available.
So I'm gonna so this is from your, as I said, from your new disc that just got released. You can find it on your website, which we'll quote. And so this is called Floating Peace. It's a short demo, about 30 seconds. So I'm just gonna play it and we're gonna listen together. So wonderful. I wish we have more time so we can just listen to a couple more of these tracks. I always start to immediately shift when I hear it. Anyway, we have to, Norlima, thank you for keeping us. I think this is the most engaging.
What can I say?
And I'd like to point out too that this new album is a little bit of a departure for us because we brought in the concept of defective jazz, the Johns Hopkins research recently on defective jazz on cognitive function. So we're combining 40 hertz with jazz, this calming jazz, which is just marvelous.
Yeah, I think my reflection on this is it seems to be much more kind of mainstream music, which I think is great because I kind of always wonder if.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that because we realized that when we use a sarangi and sitar and natal, these sort of unique Middle Eastern type or an Indian instruments, that a lot of the mainstream Americans aren't going to resonate with that. And so we want to reach as many people as possible for the benefit of this music.
Oh, I loved it. I was very impressed with your whole range.
Thank you so much.
So glad you were able to join us today, and
Yeah,
so
thank
looking
you.
forward to you coming to our retreat in October.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Before we close, anything burning that you should share with listeners?
No, just to you, Dr. Kogan, the fact that you're researching and the level of science and medical technology, what you're doing is so important, because, I'm an acupuncturist. People aren't going to listen to me that much, and my patients do, but in the mainstream, evidence-based. But we need people like you. We're so grateful for you and what you're doing to bring this evidence for the benefit of all. It's splendid, and thank you.
Well,
I wanted to add one thing, Dr. Kogan and Noor Lima. Something interesting that I'd like to open it to the audience is that if there's anybody who is an expert in sacred geometry, I asked that they contact us, because we are in process of analyzing the visual manifestation of 40 Hertz sound when it's projected into water. And we got an expert in England who invented a machine that actually take photos and video of sound being projected and vibrating in water. And we asked them, John Stuart Reid is the scientist that created this device. And John Stuart Reid did this experiment for us. They took a photo and a video of 40 Hertz sound projected into water. And what they came up with is 10-fold sacred geometry mandala, which is incredibly beautiful and intense. And what is amazing is that it's 10-fold, 10 different layers of sacred geometry, 10 of them. And what they looked at, for example, 42 Hertz, and 42 Hertz have only 8 layers of sacred geometry. And normally, as you decrease the frequency, you have less and less and less layers. So when you go down from 42 to 40, you would expect, according to all the other phenomena of sound and sacred geometry, when you go down to 40 from 42, you would expect to have, instead of 8 layers of sacred geometry, you would expect to see 6 layers. And suddenly in 40 Hertz, you see 10, and which is completely the reverse order of natural things. And that is very mysterious and very significant, that we found something unusual and rich. And the number 10, I was told, is very important, 5 and 10 in the DNA and in the golden ratio and in nature. So we have 10 layers in 40 Hertz, and the 4 worlds. I think Pazia could talk a lot about the significance of the number 40 mystically. We know there's a lot there, 40 and 10, and why is that? And so we're looking to collaborate with sacred geometry experts. If they are in the audience, please contact us. We would like to share with you these images for further analysis.
And we're gonna try to post a thumbnail of the picture, right? You guys can.
Yes.
We'll send you that photo of the 40 Hertz.
So I think that's all the time we have for today, but maybe before we just say our goodbyes, how do the people get in touch with you?
Well, we have our website is Meta with double T, Meta mindfulnessmusic.com. I can be reached through yuvalronmusic.com and through you. If anybody cannot get our website, and they can reach us through the Inayat order and through Dr. Kogan and Noor Lima.
Just post a comment in the YouTube video. We can always respond to that. And of course, we're going to put all of these links in the description so people can see that. And thank you so much, guys, for coming. Dr. Richard Gold, Yuval Ron, The Power of Healing. we will see you, the power of sound of healing. We'll see you guys in October. Norlima and I were so excited that you guys going.
Yes. Thank you so very much.
It was our pleasure.
Pleasure to
Okay,
meet you all.
peace and blessings, my friends. Thank you for having us.
Thank
Really.
you.